I used to think the desert was empty in a way that made it safe. Wide sky, clean ground, nothing hidden. That day in the canyon changed how that silence feels. I never thought I would be the kind of person to tell a story like this. I used to think most strange stories came from people filling in gaps with imagination. If you walk long enough, get tired enough, and let your mind run, you can turn normal things into something else. That is what I believed. Then this happened, and it did not leave my head the way other memories do. It sits there like a weight. The mistake was simple. We treated the desert like empty space. We thought the only real risk was heat, a wrong turn, or a storm. Slot canyons feel safe because they are contained. The walls are right there. The path is obvious. You can tell yourself that if anything feels off, you can just turn around and walk out. That is not how it felt once the canyon decided to feel closed. 2 of us went in for a day hike in southern Utah. We came out hours later with our nerves shot, moving like we were sleepwalking, and we didn't talk much the rest of the day. The only reason I am putting it down now is because I know how close it got. If one small detail had been different, I do not think we would have made it back to the car. This was not a dare. It was not some planned mystery trip. It was a normal day on a normal week, and the canyon we chose was remote but known. Not a technical climb, no ropes, just a narrow, winding path carved through sandstone, the kind of place people visit for the light on the walls and the quiet. We drove out before sunrise, the highway empty, the sky still dark. By the time we left pavement and rolled onto the dirt road, the horizon was turning pale. The land out there is wide and clean. Low shrubs, scattered rock, big sky. Even the silence feels normal, like it belongs. We packed light but not careless. Water, snacks, headlamps, a small first aid kit, a paper map, and a phone that we kept in airplane mode to save battery. Nothing fancy. No big plan beyond going in, turning around at a certain point, and being back before late afternoon. The weather looked perfect. Clear sky, mild wind in the open. No sign of storms. We checked the sky more than once because that is what you do with slot canyons. You do not want to be inside if a flash flood rolls through. That morning there was nothing like that. The air was calm and dry. Before we stepped into the slot, we did the usual boring checks. We looked at the clouds, or the lack of them. We looked at the far horizon for any gray curtain that might mean rain in another part of the region. We tightened shoelaces because sand will loosen them. We made sure both headlamps worked even though it was a day hike, because you never plan to be late. It all felt routine. That is what makes it easier to describe as real. There was no mood of chasing something strange. It was just 2 people trying to have a quiet day in a beautiful place. The entry into the canyon always feels like a temperature drop. One step you're in open sun, and the next you're in shadow with cool air on your neck. The rock walls carry their own smell too, dusty and mineral, like rain that never comes. In the first wide stretch we stopped for a second just to look up, because the walls were already high enough that the sky looked like a ribbon. It was the kind of view that makes you slow down and take it in. And for a while that was all it was. At the trailhead the parking area was small and mostly empty. A few tire marks, a wooden sign, a narrow entry where the ground dropped into shadow between rock walls. We stood there for a minute, adjusting straps, checking water, and letting our eyes get used to the contrast between open sun and the darker cut in the earth. The first part of the walk felt normal. Sand under our shoes, a few small stones, the canyon walls rising higher as we moved forward. The sound of our steps echoed the way it always does in tight places. You hear yourself more than anything else. It is the kind of echo that makes you feel alone but safe. For the first hour we saw nothing strange. The usual things were there. A few birds above the wider sections, a lizard darting into shade, old footprints in the sand from other hikers. The light came down in bright slices when the canyon opened, then faded. When the walls narrowed again, it felt steady and predictable. Then, without a clear moment where you can point to it, the sound started to change. The echo felt shorter, like the canyon stopped throwing it back at us. The faint wind that had been there at the entrance disappeared. The air went still, like the space had been sealed. It was not peaceful still. It was blank. When the echo started to flatten, it was noticeable in small ways. A footstep would land and you would expect the sound to bounce once or twice, and instead it would just stop. When we brushed a sleeve against the wall, the scrape sounded too close, like the sound did not travel. Even the little noises from gear, like a buckle tapping a pack frame, felt too sharp and then swallowed. It made the canyon feel less like a space and more like a container. At first I told myself it was just the shape of the canyon. Some bends swallow sound. Some spots are just quieter, but it kept going. No birds, no distant noise from the open desert. Even our breathing felt too loud, like there was nothing else in the space but us. We kept moving deeper because we had no reason not to. The path was clear, the walls were dry, our water was fine, and when you are in a slot canyon, going back can feel just as long as going forward. It is easier to keep the same direction and trust the plan. After another stretch, the distance started to feel wrong. We would pass a bend and expect the next open section to appear, and it would not. The canyon would keep winding, same walls, same sand, same narrow strip of sky. It was not like we were lost. It was like the canyon was repeating. The farther we went, the more the canyon seemed to bend in on itself. Some turns looked like they should open up, but they stayed narrow. Some sections that should have been in shade felt faintly lit, as if light was coming from above but not from the sun. We kept drinking water, but the dryness in my mouth did not match how much I was sipping. That was the first time I wondered if the air itself was doing something to us, because it felt like effort to stay normal. We checked our time and felt surprised. It was later than we thought. We had been walking at a steady pace. We had not stopped for long, yet the hours did not match the progress in our heads. It was the kind of mismatch that makes you second-guess your own memory. In a wider gap, I looked up through a thin opening of sky and saw a shadow pass across the light on the wall. It was quick, like a cloud moving. But there were no clouds. The sky was clean and bright. I waited for the sound of a bird or a plane. Nothing came. A little later it happened again at another opening. A shadow moved across the band of light, smooth and fast. No flapping, no sound. The shadow did not match the shape of the canyon edges. It was like something slid between the sun and the rock. At one point we reached a short chamber where the walls rose almost straight up with only a thin crack of sky. The sand there looked undisturbed, smoother than the rest of the path, like wind had brushed it clean. That should have been a nice detail, but it made me uneasy. It felt staged, like a place meant to look untouched. We stepped through it carefully, and the stillness in that pocket was so complete that it felt like holding your breath without realizing you started. We didn't stop and stare. We did the same thing people do when they do not want to admit something is wrong. We kept walking. We told ourselves it was the canyon playing tricks, or a bird high up we did not see. The problem was the silence. Even a distant plane leaves a trace in the air. This left nothing. The feeling of being followed did not arrive like fear. It arrived like pressure. The space behind us felt occupied. The echo of our steps sometimes came back late, like there was an extra beat, and when we stopped, it felt like the quiet waited with us. We turned around more than once. Every time the view was the same, a long corridor of rock, twisting away. No movement, no person, no animal, just the canyon, empty and still. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made the unease sharper, because it meant the feeling was not coming from something obvious. At midday, the heat outside should have been higher, but inside the slot the temperature felt uneven. Some sections felt cool like shade. Then, without changing terrain, the air would feel heavy and warm, like standing near a running engine. The shift would come and go without a reason. The light above the canyon dimmed once, very briefly. Not a normal change, not like a cloud passing. It was like someone turned the brightness down. The walls looked flatter, the colors muted. Then it returned, leaving that same empty stillness behind. When the light returned, it felt wrong. The bright bands on the rock did not move the way they should. They stayed in place longer than expected, like time was dragging. I remember looking at the wall and waiting for the thin line of light to crawl, and it did not. We kept going because turning around felt worse. Going forward at least felt like doing something. If we turned back, it would mean walking with that feeling behind us the whole way. It is strange how the mind chooses the direction that feels less humiliating, even if it is not safer. The canyon narrowed more than before. The walls pulled in, close enough that we had to turn sideways in a few spots. The strip of sky above became a thin line. In places it was almost nothing, just pale blue squeezed between rock edges. The sound became dead. Even a small stone shifting under a shoe felt like it made no echo at all. That is where it started to feel like a trap. Not because of the rock, because of the sense that something overhead had control of the space. The air had pressure, like your ears do not quite pop, but they want to. I kept swallowing, trying to clear it, and it would not go away. In one narrow section, the light above stopped behaving like sunlight. The strip of sky was there, but the brightness along it looked blocked. Then a shape slid across it, not fast like a bird, not drifting like a cloud. It moved with a smooth, controlled pace, and the edges looked straight. I did not see the whole thing. The canyon did not allow that. I saw enough to know it was not natural, a dark surface, matte and clean, taking up part of the skyline. It stayed for a second, then moved out of view without any sound at all. No wind, no vibration, just a shadow that did not belong. My body reacted before my brain finished explaining. Dry mouth, cold hands, a tight feeling in my chest. My breathing got shallow. The urge to talk disappeared. It was like speaking would waste air. I focused on the simple thing in front of me, which was putting one foot ahead of the other. The shadow appeared again later, but in a different way. First it blocked light ahead, then it was behind. It was never fully visible. It was always overhead, always just out of sight, like it was staying in the one place the canyon makes hard to watch. The silence got worse. Even our small movements sounded wrong. The canyon felt padded, like the rock was absorbing everything. A faint ringing started in my ears, subtle at first, then steady. It was not loud, but it was there like a thin line you could not escape. Then the heaviness started. My legs felt like they were carrying extra weight. Not tired weight, something else. My balance shifted slightly, like the ground was not level even though it was. I found myself touching the canyon wall with my hand just to keep my sense of position. The light overhead brightened without a clear source. It was not a beam. It was like the air itself was lit. The sandstone walls looked washed, and the shadows in the cracks disappeared. That is when the pressure in my ears rose sharply, like a fast change in altitude. Right before the strongest pull started, the physical changes came in layers. First a tightness behind the eyes, like staring at bright snow. Then the ringing in the ears got thicker, like it had depth. My skin prickled, not like heat, more like a static feeling along my forearms. Breathing stayed possible, but it felt like the air had weight. It reminded me of being in a very high place where you do not get enough oxygen, except we were at ground level in a canyon. The pulling sensation began in a way that is hard to describe without sounding ridiculous. It was not a jerk. It was not a drag. It was a tilt, as if gravity had leaned slightly toward the opening above. My body wanted to tip forward and up at the same time. I tried to take a step and my muscles responded slowly. It felt like moving through thick water. My thoughts started slipping. I would think, keep moving, and then the thought would fade like a dream you forget while you are still in it. Panic rose, but it felt muted, like the fear was being pressed down. I pressed my hand harder into the rock wall, and the rock felt warmer than it should have. Not hot like sun on stone, because the sun was barely reaching us. Warm in a steady way. The grip helped. Like contact with the wall gave my mind something solid to hold on to. We stayed close together without planning it. Not holding hands like a movie. Just moving as a unit, shoulder to shoulder in the tight spots, because separating felt dangerous. Each time one of us drifted a step away, the disorientation felt worse, like the canyon wanted to split us. In a section where the wall bulged, there was a shallow notch and a cluster of rough rock at waist height. We pushed into that spot on instinct, trying to get under anything that felt like cover. The moment we moved under the rough overhang, the pressure shifted slightly, like the pull had less grip. The light flickered once, not a strobe, not dramatic, just a brief loss, like the brightness blinked. The pressure in my ears spiked hard for one beat and then released. It was sharp enough that I swallowed like on an airplane. The pulling stopped so fast that my body sagged. We crouched without choosing to. The nausea came in a wave. My hands shook. The ringing in my ears faded down, but the headache stayed, tight behind my eyes. The canyon suddenly felt too bright, as if normal light was harsh after the washed glow. After the light flicker and the release, it took longer than it should have for my body to feel like my own again. Standing up felt delayed, like my brain had to send the signal twice. When I looked down, I noticed fine sand stuck to my palms in a pattern, as if my hands had been pressed flat for a while. My knees had the same sand, and my clothes looked more dusty than they should have from a short crouch. It was small evidence, but it bothered me because it didn't fit the memory. When I looked up, the strip of sky was clear again. No shadow, no shape. The canyon sounds returned, slowly, like a volume knob turning back. I heard sand shift. I heard a tiny pebble roll. I even heard a faint wind far above the walls. That normal sound should have been comforting. It felt wrong instead, like it was pretending nothing happened. We checked the time again. That is when the numbers hit. A large gap, not a few minutes. A chunk big enough that it made my stomach drop. Neither of us could account for it. The memory between two moments felt clipped, like someone cut out a section and left the ends. We did a quick check of ourselves and our gear. Water still there, but one bottle was in a different pocket. A snack wrapper was torn open even though neither of us remembered eating it. Sand on our knees and hands like we had been on the ground longer than the crouch we remembered. There were small marks, too. A red patch on a wrist like pressure. A sore spot on my shoulder that felt like a deep bruise forming. Nothing that looked like a wound, but enough to make you wonder how it got there. The worst part was the feeling that we were still being watched, just from farther away. The decision to leave did not need discussion. It was immediate. The canyon did not feel like a place to finish a hike anymore. It felt like a hallway with a door that might close. We turned around and started walking back the way we came, moving faster than we should have in a place where footing matters. The canyon felt longer on the way out. Every bend felt like it took more steps than it should. The landmarks looked familiar but delayed, like they showed up late. The silence would return in patches, and each time it did, my heart would pick up again. Near a wider section close to the canyon mouth, the light above dimmed once more, very briefly. Then a shadow appeared at the opening ahead, high and distant. It did not come closer. It just sat there, like a presence, blocking a piece of sky, as if it was waiting to see if we would make it out. When we finally reached the open desert, it felt like stepping out of a room into fresh air. Wind hit our faces. The sound of it in our ears was almost too loud. The sky looked enormous, and the bright sun felt harsh. The pressure in my ears released completely, like a tight band snapping off. We walked across open ground toward the parking area, and that walk felt unreal, like we were not fully inside our bodies. Fatigue hit hard all at once. My legs felt rubbery. My mouth tasted like metal. The headache stayed steady and my thoughts felt slow. Once on that walk, I looked up and saw a tiny dark shape high above the desert. It was so distant it could have been nothing, but it did the one movement that had started all this. It vanished straight upward, too fast to track, leaving the sky empty again. We reached the car and sat inside with the doors closed for a long time before turning the key. The interior felt safe just because it was familiar. The heater air smelled like dust. The seats felt too soft. My hands shook when I tried to drink water, like my body was still coming down from something. On the drive back, the world looked normal, and that made the whole thing harder to hold. Gas stations, signs, other cars, everything like any other day. But inside, the memory kept replaying in fragments. The sound dying, the shadow with straight edges, the pull that made my body stop obeying. On the drive out, we stopped once at a small pull-off just to get our bearings. Not to look back, but to breathe. Even then, the desert felt too open. It was hard to trust the sky after being under that narrow strip for so long. We drank more water than we thought we would need, and it still felt like we could not get fully hydrated. Later, when we finally ate something simple, the food tasted flat, like our senses were still dulled. The body reacts in strange ways when it thinks it almost got taken. Later that evening, the soreness became clearer. A bruise darkened on my hip. My shoulder ached like I had been tugged hard. The red patch on the wrist looked like it had been pressed by something narrow. The headache came and went in waves. Sleep that night was light and broken. In the weeks after, the memory didn't settle into a clean story. It stayed in pieces. Some parts were sharp, like the first shadow crossing the light. Other parts felt blurred, like the missing time had left a fog around the whole day. Ordinary sounds would set off the same physical reaction. A humming streetlight, a low plane, a quiet room. I still think about how patient it felt. Whatever it was, it did not rush. It did not scare us with noise. It stayed above, out of view, using the canyon like a blind spot. It felt like it was testing the limits of how close it could get without being fully seen. Slot canyons feel safe because they are narrow, but narrow means nowhere to go if something decides the space belongs to it. In a forest, you can run into trees, you can hide, you can change direction. In a slot canyon, you are on a line. You are inside a channel. If something follows you there, you do not feel hunted. You feel handled. For a few nights after, I would wake up with the same ear pressure, like the room had changed altitude. The strange part was how fast it brought the canyon back. A quiet house would feel too quiet. A hallway light would seem too bright. Even the sound of my own footsteps on tile would remind me of that dead echo inside the rock. I kept checking the sky when I walked outside, not because I expected to see anything, but because my body had learned that the danger could sit overhead without warning. It took a while before that reflex faded. I kept trips shorter, stayed near open trails, and never entered a slot canyon alone again. People go into those canyons every day and nothing happens. Most of the time they are just rock and light and quiet. I know that. I still love the desert, but now I pay attention to the small shifts, when the sound goes dead, when the air turns heavy, when the sky above looks blocked in a way that does not match clouds. I do not wait to see what it means anymore. I leave.